Good afternoon, I'm Mawande Mateza. Well, 25 years ago, the underbelly of world cricket was suddenly exposed when Indian police accused South African captain Hansie Cronje of match fixing. His confession rocked the sport and left his squeaky clean image in tatters. Cronje confessed to accepting money and gifts from Indian bookmakers to throw or alter the results of some cricket matches between India and South Africa during the 90s. And it was the catalyst that blew the lid off match fixing in cricket. Or did it? Cronje was crucified for his role in the scandal and banned from the sport for life, but hardly anyone else. That's after the International Cricket Council established an understaffed anti-corruption unit. And while South Africa leads the way in policing fixing in professional cricket, with legislation to boot, there are still some challenges. Players can now be approached on social media, and it's especially difficult to monitor amateur and unsanctioned cricket. But Cricket South Africa's head of anti-corruption unit, Louis Cole, says professional cricketers are adequately educated and advised on sports betting and match fixing. And we've roped in sports researcher Janet Whitton to weigh in. She's covered Hansie Cronje extensively, as well as the scandal that rocked the sport in the year 2000. Good afternoon, Janet. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Can you just give us an idea of just how big this scandal was at the time? I could imagine it's arguably the biggest scandal that has rocked South African sport.
It certainly was, and it was massive at the time. Rumours came through in the early months of 2000 that there was a match-fixing scandal brewing. Nobody was quite sure what it was. And when it emerged that Hansie Cronje was the person who was being accused, I and all my fellow cricket reporters at the time, people who had travelled extensively with the team, all of them also agreed that there's no way that Hansie Cronje was the person that was accused. But as we all know now, it emerged fairly quickly that he really was involved. He admitted when the King Commission was proclaimed by Thabo Mbeki later on that year. The fact that a presidential commission was proclaimed just shows you just how huge the story actually was. But at the King Commission, Hansie admitted to some of the instances where he was accused. But it was only after his death 2 years later in the plane crash in George that it emerged that his involvement was much bigger than he'd even admitted to, because there were a whole lot of bank accounts in the Cayman Islands that nobody knew about. So his involvement was absolutely huge. It certainly broke open and exposed that cricket was very, very vulnerable to this kind of corruption, because cricket is one of those sports where, first of all, it's partly an individual sport within a team sport. So it's easy to target individual players to make certain things happen. And cricket is one of those sports, as everybody knows, who's involved in betting completely innocently, where you don't just bet on the outcome. You can bet on all sorts of things within a game, which makes cricket and cricketers very vulnerable.
I just want to go back a little bit to the initial stages of the scandal. And did people have the sense that it would blow over, that it's Hansie Cronje, there's no ways, this is just a minor thing?
At first, I think there was that sense, but then other names started coming through, people that Hansie had approached and people who were subsequently found guilty of certain involvement. Some people who had admitted to having been approached but then didn't do anything about it. Herschel Gibbs agreed to do something and then didn't and didn't do it, so he never got the money. There were lots of instances like that. So it emerged quite slowly. But I think that after that, the first shock of Hansie's involvement being ratified, so to speak, and then other names started appearing, and then other names outside of South Africa too, because obviously the core of all of this was India-based bookmakers. That's where most of the betting comes from. We all know how obsessed about cricket India is, and that's where a lot of the betting syndicates were based, in India, and some of them in Dubai. Some of the bookmakers were businessmen who moved between the two countries, and other names started getting involved. There were Indians who we heard about. There were English players. There were Australian players. There were players from all over the place that emerged. And I think what became clear very quickly, even though Hansie was perhaps the highest profile of all of the people that were involved, and he had a lot of influence over other people, when he approached a younger, newer cricketer in the team, he had authority and they kind of listened to him, which I think is why there was so much kind of almost visceral anger at his involvement. I think a lot of what we still don't know is how many cricketers kind of slightly below the top level were actually approached, because those are the vulnerable players.
Yeah, and moving on to that, we've also had scandals since then that have rocked cricket, both in South Africa and abroad. And we've had cricketers going to jail for instances as well, with Pakistan and locally here in South Africa as well.
Absolutely, but I think that those instances are few and far between. And I'm not saying in a sense that you should feel sorry for them, but they're kind of scapegoats, because there are a lot of other people who've done things just as bad, if you like, as the players Amir and Gulambodi who we're referring to. I think there are a lot of other players who've just got bans, sometimes for a couple of years. Some of the South Africans that were found guilty in the Ram Slam T20 in 2016 have now been banned for life, some of them. So most of the action that's been taken against them has been banning them from cricket. It hasn't actually gone as far as charging them with actual crimes that have ended up by putting them in jail. And I think that's partly where the problem comes in. You need to actually decide is this just a minor problem that we need to deal with, or isn't it? And I think that's where the anti-corruption unit, you mentioned the South African anti-corruption unit, the International Cricket Council, of course, also has an anti-corruption and security unit that, like the South African one, is understaffed and underfunded, as you mentioned. And they are aware of a lot of the bookmakers and businessmen who are involved in these actions, but no action has been taken against them. So they're not looking at the source of the problem. They're only looking at the end result. And I think that's where part of the problem comes in. They need to elevate this as a crime and look at the people who are starting it.
So do you reckon that there's a lot more still to figure out, even with the efforts that have been made at the moment?
I think there definitely is a lot to be figured out, and there's a lot not just in cricket. The other sport that is very vulnerable to it for the same reasons as cricket is tennis, because there are lots of spot fixes, what they call spot fixes, little bets that you can make on losing the 7th game in the first set, etc., that you can do. And most of the betting is on paying somebody to fail. And that's easy for somebody to do, and it's easy for somebody to do without you really knowing whether they're meant to do it or not.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Janet. Appreciate your time.
Pleasure.